Messner, a former healthcare executive turned keynote speaker. At the heart of Mary's work is a simple phrase she returns to again and again. Help me think through this. An invitation that opens space for innovation, connection, and creative leadership.
I like to think about creativity as courage. We are all moving from point A to point B. We all have our high line that we're traversing. And the only way we can really do it effectively is with creativity. And that it is really simply a mindset that if you can embrace creativity as courage, you're giving yourself the permission to just try something in a new and different way.
Mary, thank you so much for being here today. I spend a lot of time with a lot of CEOs, some really big name CEOs just around the world. And I see them spend a lot of time on culture. They're always talking about culture. But then when you see their behavior outside of the workplace, it's like they're a completely different person. And if you're watching this and you happen to be one of those leaders, I'm not talking about you, just sharing an example. But, and to me, when I talk about the failure, I see them support things. So, for example, DEI was a big, there was a big attack on DEI. And I feel like people don't really understand or even care to understand because we've changed as a community. Things are changing so fast. And it's like these leaders just kind of go with the flow, and that's adding up to the failure. And when you look deeper, you see the employees within those companies are struggling to even want to stay within those organizations. And sometimes, whenever I have these podcasts, I will actually interview their employees. I'll send out a survey and I'll get those responses. It's like a lot of people are angry with their leaders, and it's impacting all like trickling down to the rest of the people. And I, as a creative individual, I know that creativity can do something to actually bridge this problem. And I wanted to hear your take as someone who talks about it.
I'm going to thank you for having me here, by the way, and for starting off with a challenge. I love a good mental game. I'm going to share my thoughts, but this might be a little wandering. So this might just kind of turn into a whole conversation back and forth here. So there is potentially, I say potentially, but just like you, I've seen this play out where there is that disconnect between who a leader thinks they need to be when they walk into a workplace versus how they see themselves when they're outside of the workplace. And I think that was probably magnified throughout that COVID era where we were forced to bring our full selves into the workplace. We were now working from home and the constant distractions of home. So that became a unique challenge. And I think that was a little bit of a gift for us to remember the humanity of who we all are. You take off the leader title and now we're parent and caregiver and every other role that haunted us.
Indeed.
I say haunted with love, but that definitely, haunted us while we were trying to navigate that whole time. And now it feels like we've swung the pendulum back the other way a little bit to say, okay, how do we go back and recapture some of who we were before we had this weird blend of work and life? And I wonder, and I would love your thoughts here. I wonder if some of that is the root cause where we're still seeking. We're still trying to say, where is the final resting place of that pendulum? Or is there a middle point, or is it constantly going to be an ebb and flow? DEI is a perfect example because there was this constant argument that we were swinging a pendulum back from one direction to another. And at the end of the day, the heart of DEI is, that I believe is where the pendulum is just perfectly centered, where we are able to balance who we are as individuals and how we become better together.
Right.
So I'm going to stop there and I'll say, what's your reaction to all of that?
Like, you mentioned something which I didn't even pick up. The fact that we've gone like virtual, half of the workforce, everybody is working from the comfort of their home. And then we've had this other issue, which a lot of people are identifying with the things that they do at work. That's becoming their defective identity. It's like, I am this title. And I think now that we're doing this, there's been that disconnect from that title, but we still have to do the same thing. But on a leadership level, and the problem that I keep seeing is like the leaders are trying to put those two worlds together. So I'm not sure if I hear you right, but that's what I'm picking up as you were talking. I'm just like, I didn't even pick that up. Like the fact that people are working from home Because I remember during COVID, I actually saw a post on LinkedIn where someone was saying that they find it very rude when they're talking to someone virtually and they can see their bad. Things like that. No. And I was like, wait, what? Like,
Yeah.
people got to figure out how to work.
They do.
And there was no guideline of like, this is how you work at your house.
Yeah.
But now people have gotten used to it and they're being told you need to go back to work. But now the leadership level, it's like, there's big, we're seeing this kind of like, like this distrust with the people. So I'm not sure, from your own perspective, do you see that play out as well when it comes to, trust between leadership and then the actual people doing the work? Not that the leaders don't do the work, but just, in a sense.
I think I'm going to try and give the leadership side some grace and say that they're trying to navigate what normal looks like now. So yes, we do have people that are still virtual, and we have people that are now back in the office, and we have people that have said, is the trust element here because so many of us are virtual, therefore we need to come back into the office. But then you say, but now I'm back in the office and I could have done this same work from home. Can you just trust me to go back home?
Right.
And I do think people who are in these high-ranking leadership positions, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they're trying to navigate this the best that they can. I just wonder if there's still a growing pain, maybe, that all of us are stuck inside of, and we're looking to our leaders to have the answer, and they don't have the answer. Now, I think some of the failure comes from the part where they pretend like they have the answer,
right?
Where they say, here's my mandate, and this is what we're going to expect from our company going forward. And they say it with confidence, and sometimes confidence and conviction can bring people alongside. And so I'll respect that. And also, I do wish there was a little bit of humanity that would show up that would say, here is what I am seeing across the company. I'm seeing a fracture of trust.
Right.
I'm seeing a struggle for people to try and find their place to contribute effectively. I don't know how to solve that, but here's some ideas that I have. I think we should try a return to work, and let's try it and let's see how it goes. I'm just throwing some different ideas out there. I think the biggest, I am a verbal processor.
Oh, no, you're good. So it's a podcast, okay?
Yeah, I know. So I am talking through this full circle. But when I think about kind of that original question of great failure of leadership, I think that some of it is in leaders feeling like they should have the answers, and therefore they make a declarative statement that maybe should be an experiment.
Right.
Or that maybe, you mentioned creativity because of that is where my focus is. Maybe it is giving themselves and others permission just simply to try something and see how it goes.
Right.
Without locking anything in. And then I think that the ripple effect of what's happening now is people say, well, this big company executive declared this statement for their work. Everyone is going to, and I'll come back to return to work. And that is just one example, I think, of the broader picture. But this big executive made everybody return to work. So they obviously know what's going on. And so I'm going to hop on that bandwagon. And that type of behavior is the antithesis to creativity. It's conformity and assuming because someone else is doing it, that's the way you're supposed to be doing it. And then things begin to fracture even further.
Yeah, that's the beautiful.
So I'm going to stop. You
Thank you for that. Especially like when you talked about like conformity. I think that's what I keep picking up, because this company did this, and then the other one is starts doing it. And even to go back to the trust piece, I think when it comes to the leadership level and the employee level, or there's a gap in between, which are the manager levels. A lot of managers are kind of left into this limbo where usually they're getting the decision from the leaders, and then they have to communicate to everybody else. And I think there's no room for them to be creative, because usually when they get those orders, and I'm talking as someone who used to be a manager at a really big company when I used to live in LA. That's why I ended up going to therapy. Now I'm here doing a podcast to like talk about this issue. But yeah, I think creativity, it's overthinked when it comes to the workplace. And I do want to know, like, and I'm going, like doing a little bit of pivot here just to get your take on what those creativity actually means to you. Because I know you've done a lot of, talks around it, but I want to hear from you as an individual doing this work. What exactly does creativity actually means to you?
Yeah. I'll start by saying what it's not, because oftentimes people hear that word creativity and it falls into a couple of buckets.
Right.
And the first one is creating a product. So that's more of the arts and crafts. It's poetry, it's painting, it's something that feels like we're creating something tangible. So I'm not talking about that type of creativity.
Gotcha.
I am also not talking about and I'm not, again, like you, I'm not going to try and pick on any certain
It's so
leaders.
hard.
Yeah.
Because we deal with people every day. So.
Yes. But, there's the type of creativity where people say, let's get creative and come up with a creative solution. And that has its place, but that's also not the kind of creativity that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I like to think about creativity as courage. And that it is really simply a mindset that if you can embrace creativity as courage, you're giving yourself the permission to just try something in a new and different way.
Right.
And it doesn't guarantee success on the other side of it. Success is another thing that we can talk about. It doesn't necessarily guarantee success, but it's giving yourself permission to explore and to take a risk and to risk failing. And all of those things require a lot of courage, because if you're fully embracing that, you don't actually know where it's going. You can't see the other side. The path isn't fully clear. And I think a lot of people, they stop themselves from fully embracing that and instead say, what's everybody else doing? Because it can be really scary to say, I'm going to let my middle level managers make the call on this one. They know their teams best. And I'm going to look to them and say, what do you think we should do? What should we try? What should we experiment with? What risk should we take here? And as a leader, then be able to be open to seeing where that goes. So courage to me is the fundamental element that lives inside of really embracing creativity.
Wow, yeah, you definitely threw me at a level saying, wait, courage, creativity. I'm thinking B-boy. I'm just so okay, interesting. So how exactly does that apply in the workplace? Like, because I know I go to a lot of companies and I see like their core values. They talk about the courage, the creativity, and like all these sort of things. But how does it exactly play out? And back to my example with the leader, the manager, and then the people. And when I say like managers, usually they don't have the creative power to do a lot of things. And to your point, the courage to even, and mind you, I'm coming from a perspective where I talk to a lot of companies with a lot of issues. So maybe I'm just jaded,
No.
But I see these problems all the time. So I want to know, how exactly does it play out, in that scenario between leadership manager? Is there a specific thing that they have to do or a tool that they have to use? Maybe I'm just used to in that tool and the things. But maybe you may have a different perspective.
Well, I will. There's probably, I'm going to call them steps.
Okay.
This is still more of a mindset shift, but for the sake of trying to get granular, I'll say there's 3 steps that I always come back to. And I work with leaders on this quite a bit. And this is when I'm speaking on stages, this is kind of the flow that I take an audience through. The first thing is recognition of the impact that conformity has in our lives. That it shows up in, we scroll through social media and there's the latest social media trend. Or looking at my daughter in the Chipotle line a couple nights ago, and she's 11 years old and doing whatever the latest TikTok dance is. And I don't know where she comes up with this. She's not on TikTok, and yet somehow there's just things that permeate no matter where we are. And in leadership, it's the same way, where there's decisions that companies are making, or there's indications that are coming from the stock market, external influences, internal influences that are telling us this is the path that we're supposed to follow to success. So this push for conformity exists everywhere.
Right.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that sometimes creates a sense of safety and community and belonging. And also, it doesn't always give us the answer that we're searching for. So that's kind of step one, is recognize the power that this desire to conform has in the work that we do every single day. And I'm talking now, I'm at that senior leadership level. That's the first piece of it. The second piece is celebrating the importance that comes from bringing others in. And so now we're kind of looking at that mid-level leader. So you got senior leader focusing on the anti-conformity and really just spending time understanding that. Now we're moving down to the manager level. And the best way that the leaders can bring the managers into the work that they're doing it's a phrase that I anchor so much of what I do. And it's what I talked about on my TED Talk. And that phrase is, help me think through this. And there's the kind of science behind that phrase is it's inviting, it's showing a level of vulnerability, and vulnerability does lead to inherent trust. You know, you trust me to come forward and say, I don't have this figured out. Will you help me think through this? So that's beginning to bridge a gap there. The other thing that it subtly says is, I'm not looking for you to tell me exactly what to do. I didn't say, hey, manager, we've got something big coming up. What do you think we should do? Instead, I said, help me think through this, which means I trust your mind. I value your ideas. Let's just throw some things out there and play. It's space to explore. So that's the second piece, is using that intentional language that just invites ideas. And then the third piece on here is spending time really understanding what success looks like. And that kind of brings us back full circle to conformity, because so often we think success is maybe bottom line, dollar, it's the tangible, measurable things. But some of it is the space where you spend doing some of your work, of just understanding the emotional and mental and spiritual health of the people that are working in the organization. Because when that is strong, the rest of those things take care of themselves. So it's spending time understanding what success really looks like. And that translates to the entire company. That's a metric, if you will, that can bring everybody in.
Wow. And you know, as you were speaking, you know, everything you said like remind me of the Super Bowl. Right there, because I've never listened to any Bad Bunny music.
I hadn't either. No, except for Gasolina, and I heard that there was that moment. Every millennial was like, oh,
"Yeah, I do know this."
Happening? I know.
No, I'm, you know, I don't know the guy, but you know, everywhere I looked, there was like, "You need to listen to this." And I went and I was like, you know what the heck? I'm gonna listen to it. I didn't watch the Super Bowl. I literally tuned in just to watch that. And I'm just like, okay, that was actually cool.
Yeah.
So like that's like a good way of like conforming, where it's like you know, not about just following everybody into doing what they want you to do, but it's like we're celebrating something that actually, you know, like inspires, you know, and also highlights you know, like a class of people that needs that attention, which is fascinating. But again, yeah. Thank you for that. That's a different perspective.
Well, and I'll take that one step further with your example. Success historically has been Super Bowl performance. Everybody loves. They can sing along to the music. They're dancing in their seats. And that was one that I remember watching it, thinking, "This is fun."
Right.
Is he gonna sing in English? I don't know. And I kept listening for it, and it didn't happen. But then I went back afterwards and I read the reflections that people were having. Research. And that was really interesting, because I genuinely was really curious to hear what people's responses. And there were people that loved it and people that hated it. But as you kind of unpacked the, the emotional journey that he went through, the joy, a wedding on stage,
the wedding,
the different cultures, the businesses that were brought in. That is a completely different way to celebrate success
Yes.
for an event than what we would ever normally expect.
Yeah.
I love that you brought up that example.
No, yeah, it was fascinating, and I remember actually having a back and forth with someone whether this was a real wedding or not, and I have no idea who this was, but we were just in threads, just kind of going back and forth.
Apparently it was.
It was a real wedding, which was different. I was like, wow, this is new, and I appreciated that.
Yeah.
Wow. So like, how can a company, like model that? Now, I'm not saying they should do the same thing, or especially from like a leadership level, especially to create a trust. We're in a time where there's like, I think 5 generations in the workplace that are all trying to coexist and work together. And I think watching the Super Bowl, like halftime show kind of shows us an example. But I'm not saying that that's what companies should do. But is there like a framework based off of your steps that they can use to do something similar like that?
There's a phrase that I use a lot, and the phrase that I use is stand on your own circle. And it has a history behind being in kindergarten and the teacher inviting all of us to come and sit on the circle for a lesson. And I got in trouble because I refused to sit on the circle.
Yeah.
And for me, that was just, I don't need to. I can learn from here, and I'm busy coloring or whatever I was doing. But that's the mentality that I do think leaders need to get past is the DEI shift was a big example of that, where we said, well, let's just make the circle bigger.
Right.
We don't need to talk about DEI. It's just a bigger circle. We've already got everybody involved. Let's keep making it bigger and bigger so everybody has a place to sit on the circle.
Right.
And I'm getting metaphorical here, so hopefully this still works. The shift that I think people need to make is not focusing on making the circle bigger, but allowing everyone space to stand on their own circle, because there is no circle that can hold all of us.
Right.
But inside of that circle, you can put a whole bunch of little circles that allow each of us to stand. And so that means we celebrate each other's individuality. We see that every single person that walks into the doors of our company has a different perspective and a different idea and a different thought process for how to get work done most effectively. And if we can create space for those conversations, and sometimes it's just as simple as, it's a great idea. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah.
Or I heard you mention something the other day. Will you come help me think through this challenge that I have? Or bringing just space to bring in these different ideas.
Right.
It allows people as individuals to start shining, for lack of a better word, to start being celebrated as individuals. And I think if a leader can embrace that type of mentality, both in themselves as a senior level executive, a manager, leader, or quite honestly, anyone in the company, because everyone has the ability to lead.
Right.
That can start shifting an entire organization. And that doesn't have to start at the top. That can start peer to peer, where those conversations start happening. But if they're celebrated and encouraged from the top, it will happen faster.
Right. And I do like that you actually put language around it, like telling someone that, help me think through this. Because I know as a leader, a lot of leaders, the moment they get that title, they think you have to know everything. But giving them that language to say, help me think through this, is like inviting someone into your orbit and saying, hey, let's work together.
Yeah.
And again, saying that it doesn't have to start from the top, I think that also adds a different layer of like, even though it's very vulnerable to like bring someone into something and trying to co-create, but giving them that language to be able to say, hey, help me think through this is different from like, I don't know what I'm doing. Just help me out.
Yeah.
Because that's what I've been telling people. Be vulnerable and tell people you don't know.
Yeah.
But usually I get a lot of pushback. They're like, well, I don't want to tell people I don't know. I'm hired to do this. I'm paid to do this. So it's telling someone I don't know, it's very vulnerable, and sometimes it's very scary. But saying, hey, help me think through this, that's a completely different perspective. You see, even the paper tried to run away to you.
It was so excited.
It's like, yes, this is the language. But yeah, and I am curious now, because you brought up your childhood story a little bit there. And I want to go back and try to understand, how did you become married today talking about creativity?
Yeah.
Like, what was the reason behind you choosing that lane and then sticking with it?
Ever since I was little, I've had the mentality of, I can figure this out. I love having a challenge put in front of me. I love puzzles. I love having a challenge put in front of me and just saying, I think I can use my brain to figure this thing out. And when my brain gets stuck, I can ask my mom, or I can ask my sister or my dad, I can bring the people in that I need. But I genuinely loved trying to solve a problem. And that I'll figure this out mentality, I think, carried me through. And I would say in my first professional job, I was an executive at a hospital here in Kansas City out of college. And I probably took, I'll figure this out a little too personally. I didn't bring other people in as much. I thought, oh, I'm 24. I mean, I was young. I really didn't know how to carry what I was carrying. But I felt like I had to be kind of what we talked about before, that failure of leadership, where I felt like I had to have all the answers. And so I would mandate things and I would act with confidence. And I learned that I'll figure this out. The power of that, when you marry the confidence that come with that, with the confidence to also invite other people in to help you think through it, that's where the good stuff is. Right. So when I progressed through my career and started experimenting more with what these different phrases had on my work and the impact they had on the people that were around me, they helped. They just became part of my vernacular, whether I realized it or not. When I transitioned into doing more keynote speaking and working with leaders, I have a lot of leaders that bring me in now when they're at that inflection point, when they know there's a big decision that they need to make and the perfect path forward isn't clear. And now I get to try and solve that puzzle for them. All of those pieces kept coming back to this idea that we are all moving from point A to point B. Whether it's a small A to B or it's some massive leap that we're trying to take, all of us at some aspect of our life are going from point A to point B. And I use the term high line just to put some words behind it. We all have our high line that we're traversing. And the only way we can really do it effectively is with creativity, because our high line looks nothing like anyone else's high line. And nothing is an exaggeration. It might look similar to someone else's high line, but it cannot be the same because it's ours. Right. And so if we want to traverse it, we're not going to do what somebody else has done. We're going to have to do what's right for us. We're going to have to lean on people. At moments, you're going to go across that high line and it's going to get foggy and you're not going to know how far off the ground you are and you're not going to be able to see the other side. And that's where the creativity piece comes in. You can only do it if you're willing to have that courage to keep going in a new and different way. And for me, that's creativity.
Now I am curious though, is there a cost to sticking with that lane? Is there a piece where your identity may be playing, through that journey of doing this work? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, like, have you ever been in a situation where being that person may be a little bit attached to your personality as a person?
Okay, tell me more. I want to make sure I'm understanding the question.
I spent a lot of time in therapy, so I'm trying not to go into the therapeutic route. But basically, being the person who is being called to do all this creativity, I guess, like strategic creative solutions.
Yes.
But as I listen, and I'm correct me if I'm wrong, I hear a little bit of like, this is who you are. And I'm trying to see, or maybe understand, maybe there's some cost to you as an individual doing this work, showing up every day to be this creative individual where it's becoming your brand. I have a fedora. There's a cost to it. I have to wear it all the time, even if it's hot. My hair hates it. Yeah. It's a very shallow cost. But on a deeper level, I'm wondering whether there's a cost to you as the like the strategist out there that's doing this work. Maybe there's something else that you want to do, but the creative lane has pulled you back because that's who you've become.
That's such a fascinating question. And thank you for clarifying, because I see what you're saying with it. Here's what I would say, that the creativity side has not been a barrier. Now, Branding, that can be tricky because when I say, oh, I speak on creativity or I work with leaders on creativity, everyone has their own definition for what that
Yes.
means. So I have to say, but let me just tell you what I mean when I say that. So there usually is that piece. But as far as it impacting who I am as an individual, where I sometimes have to pause is I feel that pull for conformity just like everyone else does. I have the desire to fit in and to hop on board with whatever the latest social media trend is.
Right.
And I have to sometimes give myself permission to say that's actually okay, because that is such a natural human desire to want to be connected to what everyone else is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And if people see me, who's anchored herself to this idea of anti-conformity and being creative, if people see me on occasion slipping backwards, that's actually okay, because that's a human behavior.
Right.
So there is a fine line that I try to walk. And I think sometimes I'm going to fail on being the creativity person, and I should, because we all, at moments, there might be a day that you forget to put that fedora on, and it doesn't make you any less powerful.
Right.
And that's okay, because we all forget those little moments at times or misstep.
Right.
But I'm going to keep thinking about this question now. I'm glad you.
Someone asked me this question, and now I like try to remind people when I talk to them to see whether, is because sometimes you brand yourself a certain way.
Yeah.
And this is a conversation that I had with Gary Vee as well, because he's like this loud Gary Vee, but behind the closed doors, completely different person, but still the same guy.
Yeah.
But a lot more calmer, a lot more, gentler. But then from the public, you see him and he gets so much backlash because of the way he talks. He cursed a lot. So it's like it comes with that as well, the cost of that. But yeah, thanks for being open to answer that.
Yeah.
I do have, a framework that we've developed on this podcast over, the past 2 years of doing the audio version. Pretty much every leader that I've spoken to, I've kind of summed it up into 4 C's, which I call the 4C index. It's not an actual index, it's just a cool name. But the first C is clarity. The second one is communication. We have capacity and crisis. And I'll give you kind of like an overview of how I take every discussion from the past, like interviews that I've done. And so far, every guest has a different take to it.
Okay.
I'm curious to hear your take. So, in the context of the 4C, the way that it plays out is to guide someone to navigate conflict, because conflict is something that we cannot avoid. It's something that would happen. You may work out today and bump into someone and turn into something else. And the 4Cs acts as a guide to help people navigate that conflict effectively and not take it too personal. So, for example, you're in a situation, you make sure that you were clear in what you want out of that situation, or not even out, but how do you see that situation play out? And then communication is how well are you able to share, those clear goals that you want to get out of it. And then you have capacity. Are you in the right headspace to even deal with this thing right now? And then if you can address those 3 things, you're more likely to avoid crisis, because crisis happen because people cannot deal with conflict. I should have added the 5C, but it was too much. I did 4C, but the goal is to address conflict.
Okay. So
I want to get your take as someone who, you've shared some really interesting, takes here today, which kind of, I'm just like, this is interesting. I'm going to go back and listen to this episode.
And then let me know what you think afterwards.
No, absolutely.
We'll keep it going.
Yeah, because, I like listen to your TED Talk. I'm just like, I think she would have a very interesting takes to the 4Cs. And I wanted to see what you think about it.
I like them. I mean, they're anchored a lot in when we think about giving effective feedback. A lot of those are some of the principal elements that are there. I'll throw in a couple thoughts too. When people, and I'm going to misrepresent your C's,
no worries,
so forgive me. But there was that being in the right headspace, and I think a lot of people shy away from conflict because they get nervous or they think, oh, I'm not going to say, I've got it all planned out in my head perfectly what I want to say, and then I'm going to walk into the room and I'm going to sit down across from the person and it's all going to fall apart. And the other piece, I'll give you another C. I'm going to throw in connection, because I think that in order to effectively get through any type of conflict or what might feel like a confrontational situation, you have to establish a level of connection with the other person. And some of that can be phrases. I'll throw phrases in there because those are great. I think when someone shares something, pausing and giving them the space to share a little more. So tell me more, as opposed to our natural desire to immediately respond or to say, yes, me too, or here's where I disagree, the space to say, tell me more, because the other person's probably just as nervous as you are. And now you've given them an opportunity to reframe their words or to clarity, anything that they might have already missed. The other thing that I tell people a lot, if you're walking into a situation that feels really uncomfortable, tell the other person that you're uncomfortable. Hey, I feel like this might be a tough conversation and maybe I'm misreading it. I'm feeling nervous, but this is important, so I'm going to move forward with it. And there's an immediate emotional connection that's established when you give someone that type of permission. So I'll pause there, but I'll say that I love what you've got, and I would throw connection into the mix.
No, yeah, thank you. And earlier when you were talking, you like talked about like creativity and like conformity. I was like, I noticed that everyone I talk to, they always have a C.
There's
Isn't that interesting?
curiosity you can throw in there. C. Every time that if I work on an update on branding or anything on what I do, I feel like everything comes back to C.
It's
I don't
very
know.
interesting.
We need to do a research project on that.
If you guys hear me saying 50 C's by the time I'm done, they're like, why do you have so many C's? I'm like, everybody has their own C, man.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But so like, again, one thing that I want to also talk about when it comes to the 4 C's is like capacity. And I've noticed that everyone has a different take to it. I had like Paul Kempinski here, who is I believe he was the former CEO at Trinity Mercy. He like most recently stepped down, but the way that he talked about capacity, not from his own lens, but the way that he would deal with his own leadership team, it's like he wanted to do everything. And then he find out that whenever, he would talk about everything that he wanted to do, he would get an okay, but he's slowly realizing that he was running everyone out of capacity. And as I talk to you, I think you may have a different, and again, I apologize saying I think, that's because I've watched so much of your content.
That's okay.
And I hear things as you speak. And I want to get your take on capacity specifically. I know it's a big issue. A lot of people don't realize when they're at capacity, sometimes they keep pushing, and usually that leads to them just running out of like energy and not being in the right headspace to even be there for one another. I think it's a major problem, and I see it all the time. And as myself, I ran out of capacity to a point that my body just gave up one day. I literally had Bell palsy for 2 months. Half of my face was paralyzed from just doing random stuff, not stopping. This was about 6 years ago. So I want to get your take as someone who talks about creativity. Is there anything that you, I pick from what I'm saying right now when it comes to someone who talks about creativity, and how can we deal with capacity better?
I think capacity comes from different places. So, and we'll look at this creatively.
Yeah.
I think there's the immediate word for capacity. It's work that needs to be done in the amount of time in the day to do that. And so you take on more than the time in the day allows you to deliver. That's a transactional way to look at capacity. The other way that I would look at capacity is the energy behind it. When we are energized about something, our capacity to do it is amplified.
Right.
When we are not energized about something, our capacity to do it is it shrinks. That's that's the sound of shrinking. And so I think it's not as cut and dry as we assume. My capacity for the work that I do right now feels really exponential because I love it.
Right.
And so I think about it in the shower, and I think about it before I go to bed. And that doesn't exhaust me. That excites me. But in previous places where I've worked, I have felt overrun and burnt out and run down, largely because I was not energized by the work that I did. So it's not exactly an answer to capacity, but I think we have to think about it more in terms of what energy can we carry for the work that we're doing, as opposed to how much time do we have to accomplish what needs to be accomplished.
Right.
And I'll also say that when you're aligned with the energy, the stuff that you actually don't need to do, that you felt like you had to do, that might just naturally start to fall away.
Right. Well, you're about to have a lot of people evaluate what they're doing and be like, okay, so I'm having a lack of energy because of, the energy just towards this project or this company is not there. And unfortunately, a lot of people find themselves in that position. But thank you for that. We're getting close to it, to the ending, and I have a closing tradition that I ask people here, based on everything that we talked about. And I know I've kind of took you on different buckets here, but after everything that we've talked about this afternoon, how is your spirit right now, as just in general?
This has been a gift, and in the spirit of work, life, transparency, and I'm have fallen into what I think is affectionately called the sandwich generation, where we've got little kids, and my husband and I have turned the point where now we're starting to care for aging parents, and February has been a doozy and a half. And so then I come here and I just get to think, and I get to let my brain play and just have a good conversation. And this is exactly what I needed. So thank you. Well, this raised my spirits quite a bit.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And again, thank you so much for being here today. I know we're going to have a continued conversation. I would love to have you again, either during the roundtable or another episode in the future. But thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much.